Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Canadian jazz saxophonist Jim Brenan. He opened up about his latest 2019 CD called 50/50, so spending half his time in Edmonton and the other half in Calgary has given him that backbone. He is a very talented guy playing regularly in both cities, and he wanted to capture the talent and creativity of the musicians from both of the communities, thus 50/50. As the 11th member of the group, Jim serves as the composer, arranger, tenor saxophonist, and peacekeeper between the Oilers and the Flames fans. He's full of great tales, so get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Jim, thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So let's talk about your latest CD, 50/50. It's a very entertaining and great listen, and I want to know from you, what was your artistic vision with this release?
Oh, okay. So, well, thanks for liking the record and giving it a spin. I really appreciate that. Well, I was sort of starting to experiment with writing for a larger group. You'll notice there's 11 musicians on that record rather than the standard jazz quartet or quintet, which I had been doing previously. And I had been spending a lot of time listening to gospel organists, of all things, primarily like Doobie Powell. I kind of, one late night I was at that Gospel Chops website, and I went through all the gospel organists, and I discovered Doobie Powell, and I really kind of dug what he was doing. And from a jazz musician perspective, they don't think in the harmony is quite a bit different. It's not all cadential, kind of like 2-5-1s like we think. And it really kind of caught my ear, I guess, kind of being a child of the 70s, 80s, it's kind of a sound that I always sort of appreciated. That led me to check out people like Ronnie Foster and sort of a little bit more groove-oriented music from largely the 70s. And I just kind of sort of immersed myself in that world for a little while and started writing music that was influenced by that.
So let's get to the beginning of your life in Edmonton. And I want to know how you got involved with music and what jazz you listened to growing up.
I started out like most kids in Canada who are in band. You get a choice of electives in junior high, and I really wanted to play the trumpet in grade 7, but the band director said, there's enough kids that wanted trumpet. I had to have my second choice, which was the saxophone. And he made all the boys play the tenor and all the girls play the alto, which is, kind of, we wouldn't necessarily do that today. But so I got a tenor saxophone in grade 7, and I did what all kids do. I never practiced. I didn't really do anything. You know what I mean? I just did band class and enjoyed it. But the great drummer Grady Tate came to town. He gave a clinic, and he played for us, and he said, you should listen to jazz music. It really kind of caught. So I went to the library, and I just took out all these albums with saxophones on the front cover, from John Coltrane to Spyro Gyra, to Phil Woods and Richie Cole, to Michael Brecker's heavy metal bebop, things that were kind of available at that time. I think some Sonny Stitt. And I immediately was drawn to sort of the more aggressive sort of fusion rock saxophone players like Brecker. It kind of was a hit for me. And so I started out really liking that kind of stuff. And once you start listening to Michael Brecker, you'll discover Sanborn, and you'll figure out who Bob Mintzer is, and then you'll realize that Hank Mobley played a role. And, I kind of worked backwards from that to get to some earlier jazz, and then sort of always kind of kept working forward to be kind of contemporary as well.
You've spent, half your life, there's this mix between Edmonton and Calgary, and it really fuels your music. Talk to me about those two cities, what they mean, and how they influence you creatively.
Yeah, perfect. So I grew up in Edmonton, and Edmonton had a really great iconic scene of older gentlemen who played. At least when I was a kid, they were older gentlemen, they're in their 40s and 50s, but they had done a lot in Canada. Tommy Banks was already sort of a national treasure. He was a great piano player, an incredible arranger, kind of a great philanthropist of music. He did TV, did radio, he did tours and whatnot, and was a really great influence in Canada. And there was a great saxophone player here named P.J. Perry, who's also like the Order of Canada, kind of like a national treasure of bebop, just a really fantastic guy. And Edmonton had this sort of real entrenched scene, and as a young person, Calgary was kind of more young and up and coming, and although they had some really great musicians as well, it wasn't quite the same. So I grew up in Edmonton and I had that great foundation, and then later on in life I moved to Calgary. I've been here now for 15 years, and the scene is a little bit younger, and it's just slightly, maybe there's more corporate work here than in Edmonton. There's more artwork being created in Edmonton. It was kind of always a divide. And one of the things I always hear when I'm living in Calgary, even to this day, someone will say, well, you guys from Edmonton. You know what I mean? Like that, like I'm always being defined by where I come from, even though I've actually lived as long in Calgary as I have in Edmonton. So in my mind, I travel back and forth, and actually my wife lives in Edmonton. She got transferred, and we're doing this long distance relationship. We've got a little house in Edmonton, and I've got a little place here in Calgary. I spend a lot of time on the highway, and I'd get to Edmonton, and they'd say, "What's happening in Calgary?" And I'd come back to Calgary, and they're like, "What's happening in Edmonton?" And I realized that I'm working in both areas, and I've got this connection to these musicians in the north and these musicians in the south. And putting together the record, it was real easy to find half the band from Edmonton and half from Calgary. And it kind of, and it's my small effort to kind of join our communities together, you know, in a way to create a little less mystery about who we are and what we do.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when did you realize that you were going to be a professional musician and this was going to be your life?
Oh, man. Well, when I left high school and I went to university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had been really invested in drawing, being an illustrator. So I went and got a graphic design degree before I went to music school. And I did that in Calgary, actually, here at what was then called the Alberta College of Art, ACA. But I did that for 2 years. But while I was here, I was ending up paying my rent. So this was in the 80s, late 80s. I was paying my rent playing gigs in Calgary. And so I was kind of working on my degree, and I got a summer job offer in Edmonton to play in a big band all summer long through a government STEAD grant, STEP grant. So we would play old folks' homes and outdoor festivals, and every day we rehearsed, and then we would do all these concerts during the week. And so for 4 months I did that. I really enjoyed it, and I decided I would give music a shot and see what happened. So I sort of started my music career when I was about 19. Once I finished my grad degree in 95, you know, you're kind of looking around a little bit, and I ended up getting a job, and then soon after I went on the road with Maynard Ferguson, I was like, okay, I could probably be an educator performer. That's what I sort of looked at myself as. So around 95, I guess, was when I really figured out what I was going to do.
I've always heard really hysterical stories about Maynard and being around him. Talk to me a little bit about what it was like to be around him. I mean, he's such a veteran, legendary guy in jazz. What was that like?
Yeah, I really value my time with Maynard. I was there for about just around the 6-month mark, and at that time, I was actually really looking to go on the road and do a road gig. You know, there's not many left. And I thought that would be, you know, if you could pick one, you know, especially big band road gigs. You hear about Ellington and Basie and all those great bands. By the time I came up, it was really, there wasn't very many left. And Maynard seemed to, I think it might have been the last large band run by the original guy. You know what I mean by that? Like, it wasn't a ghost band. So getting on that band, it was a real treasure. I mean, it's really funny. When you get on that band, at least my experience was, they sent me a round trip ticket for the first week. If you didn't make it after if you weren't cutting it, you were going home, right? So you get on the band, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. You solo in front, you stand up in front of the band. It's high energy. You have to play a little bit louder than you would have normally. The guys were kind of really road tested, and I was really green, you know, so I always sort of felt like the real rookie in the band. But Maynard was a true gentleman. He was the greatest band leader you could have. In fact, he was so much fun. We'd all be in bed, and he'd be standing there telling a story. You could ask him anything. You could say, tell us about that time Joe Henderson was in the band. Tell us about that time you played with John Coltrane. Tell us, you could, and then it would off and running. He'd tell these great stories. He loved everybody. and you could tell he really loved it. I sent a disc to Maynard, to Maynard's management. I guess I was lucky enough to be the next one on the list, and they gave it a listen, and then they called me and offered me a week. You get a week with Maynard with a round-trip ticket. So I flew out to Indianapolis, and we played at the Indianapolis Jazz Festival. David Baker was there, and Slide Hampton was there, and one of my old profs, Larry Ridley, was there, and it was kind of a really kind of a surreal experience coming from the north of Alberta, and all of a sudden you're playing with Maynard Ferguson. We traveled all over the place, all over Europe. We got, all kinds of festivals and concerts, and in fact, I tried to keep a notebook of all the places I've been, and I mean, it was impossible. We were playing 5-6 nights a week, and sometimes you'd be in a place for 12 hours, and then you get on the bus, or you'd be in a place for 6 hours, and then you'd ride the bus for 18 hours to the next stop. It was a really great experience that I felt was really kind of helped shape my career in a lot of ways. Seeing how Maynard acted every show, he was always prepared. I always used to say something like 3 or 4 nights out of the week, Maynard was still the greatest trumpet player, the greatest high note trumpet player. But he was getting older, and he had some really great young guys who had his back on the trumpet just in case he wasn't feeling up to some of those extreme notes, some young guys who were really into it. It was a really fun band. I loved every second of it, and he invited us to his house out at Ojai, and he treated everybody as an equal, and it was just such a fantastic, reminder of how great and warm and inviting, this musical community can be. It was a really great experience for me. We also got to tour with Diane Shure at that point. She came and sang we did a bunch of dates with her, and we made a record at Capitol Studios in Los Angeles with Michael Feinstein, which was also a great experience. I got to meet a bunch of sort of Los Angeles studio, superstars like Dan Higgins was on tenor, and Wayne Bergeron was playing lead trumpet on that gig. It was really great. It was a really great experience I still cherish to this day.
Speaking of getting on the other side of it, speaking of live shows, what live shows early on, jazz shows, did you see that really left an impression on you?
Oh, the funny thing is, growing up in Edmonton, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's a club there called the Yardbird Suite, and it's a volunteer-run club, and it's one of the longest-serving clubs in Canada. And man, there's so many standouts, it's almost impossible. But I remember seeing Dave. Okay, so if I was in high school, grade 10, 11, and 12. Steps Ahead came, they played the festival, I remember that. I remember seeing Michael Brecker, I remember seeing Bob Berg, I remember seeing Eddie Harris, I remember seeing Jan Gabarek, I remember seeing Dave Holland's band, I remember seeing Mike Stern's band, I remember seeing Tom Harrell with Phil Woods, George Cables would come a lot. Man, let's see, it's like never ending who's who of jazz, at a certain period of time. Everybody, the Yardbird Suite is such a national treasure in Canada. There's so many great acts, even now to this day. All the young guys, all the players who are making a name for themselves in jazz eventually get up through the Yardbird Suite. It's a great place. Now, we don't have any place like that in Calgary, but there's Edmonton, and the festival, the Edmonton Jazz Festival was really prominent for a number of years. It's been taken over in the last, I'd say, about 10 years by a musician in Edmonton named Kent Sangster, who's also a performer. And he brings in great artists. I saw Mono Neon last summer. That was like a surprise show. Ghost Note, his band was Ghost Note, and that was a real treat for me. And there's so much great music.
Wonderful. So why do you love jazz?
Why do I love jazz? It's interesting, as a self-expression. It really speaks to me as somebody who has something to say, I guess. I'm kind of a classicist in that I really like the history of it and learning the language and having a legacy and sort of following sort of a tradition that really responds to me. I love the improvisation element of it, and I really liked learning about how to write for this ensemble. It really answered a lot of questions about how to do something. I mean, I've read a lot of the books, and I know how to compose, and I broke every rule to kind of figure out that I'm going to have to follow the rules, in a lot of ways. It really kind of answers a lot of my creative questions playing jazz.
Right on. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception or a version of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself as. Who do you think you are?
Oh man, who do I think I am? As a human being, I'm empathetic. I feel. I'm rigid. Let me think. I'm probably somewhat stubborn. I think all musicians to pursue this music have to be somewhat stubborn in the choices they make, because there are so many choices. That's a difficult question for any Canadian to answer. We never do this.
Yeah, that's right. It is. Totally.
Yeah, man. It's super tough.
Yeah, you answered it, though. You totally answered it. And hey, man, thank you for taking some time out with Neon Jazz to talk about 50/50, to talk about your career in music. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players up north in Canada and down here in America. And thanks to Jim for his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.